What's up, history seekers? Welcome back to Neural Battlefields, the channel where we dive deep into the mysteries that shaped our world. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss our journey through time's greatest enigmas. Today, we're venturing into the heart of Central America to uncover one of history's most baffling mysteries: the Maya. A civilization so advanced, so sophisticated, that even today we struggle to fully comprehend their achievements. And then seemingly overnight they vanished, their great cities abandoned, their monuments reclaimed by the jungle. But what really happened? Was it drought, war, divine punishment, or something far more complex? Stay with me, because what you're about to discover will challenge everything you thought you knew about ancient civilizations. It's the year 800 CE. Deep in the rainforests of what we now call Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, and Honduras, enormous stone pyramids pierce through the jungle canopy. The city of Tikal alone houses over 100,000 people, making it larger than most European cities of that era. Massive plazas buzz with merchants, priests, nobles, and commoners. The smell of copal incense fills the air as priests perform sacred rituals atop towering temples. Astronomers track the movements of Venus with stunning accuracy. Mathematicians calculate using a concept of zero that wouldn't reach Europe for another 500 years. Writers record history in one of the world's most sophisticated writing systems, leaving behind thousands of hieroglyphic inscriptions that tell stories of kings, conquests, and cosmic cycles. This is the Maya at their peak. This is the classical period, a golden age that had flourished for over 600 years. But within just a century, between 800 and 900 CE, this magnificent civilization would experience a catastrophic collapse. Cities that had stood for generations would be abandoned. Populations would plummet by up to 90% in some regions. The jungle would swallow their greatest achievements. And for over 1,000 years, their secrets would remain hidden beneath vines and earth, waiting to be rediscovered. But here's what makes the Maya truly fascinating. They didn't just disappear. They didn't all die. Millions of Maya people still live in Central America today, maintaining their languages, traditions, and cultural heritage. So what we call the Maya collapse isn't about the disappearance of a people. It's about the sudden, dramatic fall of one of the ancient world's greatest civilizations. And the truth behind this collapse is far stranger and more complex than any simple explanation can capture. Let's rewind the clock and start at the beginning. Who were the Maya really? The Maya civilization didn't spring up overnight. Its roots stretch back over 3,000 years, to around 1500 BCE, when the first Maya-speaking peoples began settling in the tropical lowlands of Mesoamerica. By 250 CE, they had entered what archaeologists call the classical period, and this is when things got interesting. Unlike the massive, centralized empires of Rome or China, the Maya organized themselves into dozens of independent city-states. Think of it like ancient Greece, but in the jungle. Each city had its own king, called a Kayuhul-Ajo or divine lord, who claimed descent from the gods themselves. These weren't primitive villages. We're talking about true cities with populations in the tens of thousands. Tikal, Calakmul, Palenque, Kapan, and dozens of others competed for power, resources, and prestige. They built pyramids that rivaled those of Egypt. They created art so beautiful it still takes our breath away. They developed a writing system so complex that we're still deciphering parts of it today. And their understanding of astronomy and mathematics, absolutely mind-blowing. The Maya created not one, but multiple calendar systems that worked together like gears in a cosmic machine. Their long-count calendar could track dates millions of years into the past and future. Their astronomical observations were so precise they could predict solar eclipses, track the movements of Venus, and calculate the lunar cycle to within seconds of modern measurements. All of this without telescopes, without computers. Using only careful observation, mathematics, and an almost supernatural dedication to understanding the heavens. But the Maya weren't just stargazers and mathematicians. They were warriors, traders, artists, and builders. They transformed the challenging environment of the rainforest into a productive homeland through ingenious agricultural techniques. They built raised fields in swamps, carved terraces into hillsides, and created complex water management systems that captured and stored rainfall. They established trade networks that stretched from central Mexico to what is now Panama, exchanging cacao, jade, obsidian, feathers, and countless other goods. Their cities were masterpieces of architecture and urban planning. Central plazas served as gathering places for ceremonies and markets. Ball courts hosted ritual games where teams competed in a sport that was part athletic contest, part religious ceremony, and sometimes ended in sacrifice. Palaces housed the royal families in luxury that would have impressed any European monarch. And the temples, those magnificent step pyramids that still dominate the landscape today. They weren't just buildings. They were artificial mountains, sacred spaces where earth met sky, where humans could communicate with the divine. By the 8th century CE, the Maya classical civilization had reached its absolute peak. Populations were at their highest. Art and architecture achieved their greatest sophistication. Warfare between city-states was frequent but followed established rules and rituals. Inscriptions boast of captured kings and successful battles. Everything seemed to indicate a civilization at the height of its power. And then came the collapse. Between 800 and 950 CE, something went catastrophically wrong. One by one, the great Maya cities of the southern lowlands fell silent. Construction projects were abandoned mid-build. No more monuments were erected. No more dated inscriptions were carved. It's as if someone just turned off a light switch. The archaeological evidence is stark and undeniable. Population levels crashed. Some estimates suggest that up to 90% of the population in certain regions either died or migrated away. Cities that had thrived for centuries were abandoned to the jungle. Within a few generations, trees and vines reclaimed plazas where thousands had once gathered. Temples that had stood as symbols of divine power crumbled into ruins. But here's the truly haunting part. They left everything behind. We've found partially constructed buildings with tools still lying where workers dropped them. We've discovered elaborate tombs prepared for kings who were never buried in them. It's like the population just walked away one day and never came back. So what happened? For over a century, archaeologists, historians, and scientists have been trying to solve this mystery. And the more we learn, the more complex the picture becomes. There's no single smoking gun, no one catastrophic event we can point to and say, that's what killed the Maya. Instead, what we're discovering is that the collapse was caused by a perfect storm of interconnected factors, each one feeding into the others until the entire system reached a breaking point. Let's start with the most compelling piece of evidence: drought. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, scientists made a breakthrough. By analyzing lake sediments, cave formations, and other geological evidence, they discovered that the Maya heartland experienced a series of severe droughts between 800 and 1000 CE. We're not talking about a bad year or two. We're talking about multi-decade droughts, some lasting up to a century, that were among the most severe in the past 7,000 years. Now imagine what this meant for the Maya. Their entire civilization was built on agriculture, primarily maize, beans, and squash. They had developed sophisticated techniques to maximize food production, but these systems required consistent rainfall. The Maya lowlands don't have many rivers. Cities relied almost entirely on seasonal rains and elaborate systems of reservoirs and cisterns to store water. When the rains failed, when lakes and reservoirs dried up, when crops withered in the fields year after year, the consequences would have been devastating. Famine would have set in, people would have started to starve, but it gets worse. When resources become scarce, when there isn't enough food and water to go around, what happens? Conflict, competition, violence. And this is exactly what the archaeological evidence shows us. Signs of warfare intensified during the collapse period. We find more fortifications being built. We see evidence of burning and destruction. Skeletal remains show increased violence and malnutrition. The careful, ritualized warfare of earlier periods gave way to desperate struggles for survival. But drought alone can't explain everything. Here's where it gets really interesting. The Maya collapse wasn't just an environmental disaster. It was a systemic failure of their entire civilization. Let's talk about politics and social structure. Maya society was intensely hierarchical. At the top sat the divine king, who claimed to be able to communicate with the gods and ensure the continued favor of the heavens. Below him were nobles, priests, warriors, scribes, and artisans. At the bottom were the farmers and laborers, who made up the vast majority of the population. This system worked as long as the kings could deliver on their promises. As long as the rains came, the crops grew, and the kingdom prospered, people believed in the divine authority of their rulers. But what happens when the rains stop coming? When the gods seem to have abandoned their people? When the king's rituals and sacrifices fail to bring relief? The entire ideological foundation of Maya kingship begins to crumble. We can see this crisis of faith reflected in the inscriptions. During the collapse, monuments stopped being erected to glorify kings. The last dated inscription at many sites suggests that royal dynasties simply ended. No conquest, no dramatic overthrow, just silence. It's as if people stopped believing in the system altogether and simply walked away from the cities and the kings who had failed them. Then there's the environmental factor beyond just drought. The Maya had been modifying their environment for centuries. They cleared vast areas of forest for agriculture and building materials. They needed enormous quantities of wood for construction, for making plaster, for fuel. Studies of pollen and soil samples show that by the classical period, much of the Maya heartland had been heavily deforested. This created a cascade of environmental problems. Without forest cover, soil erosion increased. Water retention decreased. Local climate patterns may have been altered, potentially making droughts even worse. The Maya had essentially undermined the environmental foundations of their own civilization. Some researchers have found evidence of something even more troubling: pollution. That's right, ancient pollution. Some Maya cities show signs of mercury, phosphorus, and other toxic substances contaminating their water supplies. These pollutants likely came from construction materials, waste disposal, and everyday activities. Imagine already struggling with drought, and the water you can find is contaminated and making people sick. The crisis compounds. But wait, there's another layer to this mystery. The collapse wasn't universal. While the great cities of the southern lowlands fell silent, Maya civilization in other regions actually thrived. Cities in the northern Yucatan Peninsula, like Chichen Itza and Uxmal, continued to flourish for centuries after the southern collapse. Coastal trading communities remained active. Maya culture, language, and traditions survived. This tells us that whatever happened wasn't some kind of civilization-wide catastrophe like a plague or invasion. It was specifically the southern lowland city-state system that failed. This regional variation gives us important clues. The northern cities had better access to groundwater through natural sinkholes called cenotes. They weren't as vulnerable to drought. They also may have had different political systems, different economic structures, different ways of organizing their societies that proved more resilient when crisis struck. The collapse, then, wasn't about the Maya people or Maya culture failing. It was about one particular way of organizing a complex society, reaching its breaking point. Recent research has added yet another fascinating dimension to this story: trade networks. The Maya cities weren't isolated. They were connected through complex networks of trade, alliance, and rivalry. When one major city collapsed, it sent shockwaves through the entire system. Trade routes were disrupted. Alliance networks fell apart. The collapse of one city made neighboring cities more vulnerable, creating a domino effect. Some researchers argue that this systemic interconnection, which had been a source of strength during good times, became a transmission belt for crisis during bad times. There's also evidence suggesting that the elite classes may have overextended themselves, building bigger and bigger monuments. supporting larger and larger royal courts, engaging in more and more costly warfare and ceremony. All of this required resources extracted from an agricultural population that was already being pushed to its limits. When drought struck and agricultural productivity plummeted, the entire top-heavy system became unsustainable. The farmers who made up the majority of the population may have simply decided that supporting the elite was no longer worth it and migrated to areas where they could eke out a better living. So here's what we think happened, based on our best current evidence. Around 800 CE, a series of severe droughts began to strike the Maya heartland. These droughts were made worse by centuries of deforestation and environmental degradation. As agricultural productivity collapsed, food became scarce. Competition for resources intensified. Warfare became more frequent and destructive. The kings, who claimed divine authority to ensure prosperity, lost credibility as they failed to stop the disasters. The complex political and economic systems that had sustained Maya civilization for centuries began to unravel. Cities were abandoned, not in some dramatic exodus, but gradually, as people made the rational decision to leave and try to build new lives elsewhere. Some moved to the northern cities. Others dispersed into smaller rural communities. Still others may have died from starvation, disease, or violence. The collapse took decades, even centuries in some places. It wasn't a singular event but a process of systemic failure. And here's the crucial point. The Maya people survived. Maya civilization survived. It adapted. It transformed. It persisted in new forms and new places. When the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, they encountered millions of Maya people living in dozens of city-states, particularly in the Yucatan Peninsula and the Guatemalan highlands. These were the descendants and cultural inheritors of the classic Maya, still speaking Maya languages, still practicing Maya traditions, still building on Maya knowledge. Today, over 7 million Maya people live in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They speak over 30 different Maya languages. They maintain cultural traditions that stretch back thousands of years. The collapse of the classic period city-states didn't mean the end of Maya culture. It was a transformation, a painful adaptation to new circumstances, but the Maya endured. So what can we learn from the Maya collapse? What does this ancient mystery tell us about our own world? I think the lessons are profound and troubling. The Maya collapse shows us that even sophisticated, advanced civilizations are vulnerable to environmental change, especially when that change is amplified by their own actions. It demonstrates that complex systems, no matter how successful they appear, can reach tipping points where small changes trigger cascading failures. It reminds us that political and religious institutions lose legitimacy when they fail to address the real needs of their people. And it teaches us that civilizations can persist and adapt, but often not in the forms they once took, and not without tremendous human suffering. The Maya story is ultimately one of both tragedy and resilience. Yes, a great civilization fell, cities were abandoned, knowledge was lost, countless lives were disrupted or ended, but the Maya people survived. They adapted. They found new ways to live, and they preserved the essence of their culture through a millennium of change and challenge. That's not just a story about collapse. It's also a story about human persistence and adaptability. As we face our own environmental challenges, our own resource pressures, our own complex interconnected systems, the Maya collapse offers both a warning and a glimmer of hope. A warning that we ignore environmental limits at our peril, that even the most successful civilizations can fail if they undermine the foundations of their own existence. But also hope that human cultures can endure, adapt, and find new ways forward even in the face of catastrophic challenges. The Maya mystery isn't fully solved. We're still learning, still discovering, still piecing together the details of what happened. New technologies like LiDAR are revealing hidden cities beneath the jungle canopy. Advanced climate science is giving us better understanding of ancient environmental conditions. Improved techniques for reading Maya inscriptions are unlocking more of their written history. Each discovery adds another piece to this vast puzzle. And maybe, just maybe, understanding what happened to the Maya will help us navigate our own future more wisely. So there you have it, folks, the mysterious truth behind the Maya collapse. Not a simple story of disaster and disappearance, but a complex tale of environmental stress, political failure, systemic breakdown, and ultimate survival. A civilization that reached extraordinary heights, faced catastrophic challenges, and transformed itself to endure. If this deep dive into ancient history fascinated you, make sure to show some love by hitting that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more content like this. Subscribe to Neural Battlefields if you haven't already, because we've got so many more mysteries to explore together. Share this video with anyone who loves history, archaeology, or just great stories about the human experience. And drop a comment below. What do you think really caused the Maya collapse? What lessons should we take from their story? I read every comment and I love hearing your perspectives. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember that every mystery we solve reveals how much more there is to discover. This is Neural Battlefields, signing off.